All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Embodied Resilience, a root chakra shop presented by myself, Ashley Whiteside, licensed master social worker, founder, curator, and clinician of Altruistic Ash. I'm super excited to be bringing back this specific workshop. This was the first workshop that I had developed ever and presented ever, and it is my favorite. And I'm so glad I was able to come back to the medicine of this workshop because it was super duper important. So let's hop right in. Order of operations, kind of the flow and the groove we're working through today. I'll give some introductions, some information about myself. We'll go through some community agreements while we're in this space. We'll talk about what the root chakra is, and then we'll get some information on what is trauma and how does trauma show up in our brain and in our bodies. We'll then talk about reclaiming safety, and then we'll have our community closing, which will include a brief meditation. All right. But first, it's me, Ashley. My name is Ashley C. Whiteside. I use they, she, and beloved pronouns. I am a Black healer of Black mothers, sisters, and daughters. I believe that Black women are the cornerstone of our communities and our families, and thus essential to healing our Black communities as a whole. I continue to hone in on my offerings as a therapist for one-to-one sessions, as well as a group facilitator is conducting community education workshops in which we are able to provide accessible and relevant information to the Black and Brown communities, making mental health information demystified. That's me. Community agreements, we keep them really simple here. Speak from the I, so speaking from your personal experience, trying not to generalize or speak on experiences that are not true to yourself. Stories stay and lessons leave. And what that means is anything that's shared here in this space, any intimate details that folks share here are to say sacred to this space. Anything that you learn, any information that you gain from this workshop, you can continue to take with you and integrate into your own journey. Take care of you. We're going to be talking about some pretty intense topics today. If you need to stretch, move, lay down, turn this off and step away, go get some water, use the bathroom, whatever you need to do, take care of you. And this includes for folks who are watching on the replay. If you need to pause and walk away and come back later, please do that to take care of yourself if it becomes too intense. And also take up space. This space is here for us to learn, ask as many questions, share what feels important and relevant for you, and be here, okay? Anything else that folks need or want to add to our community agreements so that they can show up as best as they need in this space today? And you can unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. All right. Just out of curiosity, for the folks who are here with us live, what are you looking to get from this chakra shop? What are the things that you were hoping? What about this topic specifically intrigued you to signing up and wanting to get some more information?
Hey, so I'll speak. Firstly, I was able to meet Ashley a couple days ago. Thought that she and the work that she was doing was pretty magical. And I am currently being treated for PTSD. So I have my own share of trauma that I'm symptomatic for. And I was just really interested in, hearing it being taught from a Black woman, someone who looks like me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Leslie. I really, really appreciate that. And that's really important, right? Because if you Google PTSD and what PTSD means and looks like, a lot of the information that's out there is information presented by typically white men who have master's, doctoral, PhDs, MPDs, or MDs. And They have very little information and definitely no knowing, like true, authentic knowing of what the complexity is in being able to heal trauma and the complexities of trauma for Black women. Absolutely. Also dropped in the chat says grounding and more attention to my root chakra. Absolutely. So we will get all into all of that and hopping right in here. Our root chakra is our foundation for life. So the root chakra is just to back up and provide information for folks that may not be familiar with the system of chakras. They come from the Hindu tradition, and the chakras are energetic points within our bodies. Typically, when folks have the conversation around chakras, they talk about the 7 chakras, which are aligned on the spine, and they go from the bottom of the spine to the top of our skull. But in actuality, there are hundreds of different chakras. And the cool part about chakras is that they are just energy centers within our bodies. So a lot of us pay a lot of attention to the 7 main ones, which are our root, our sacral, our solar plexus, our heart, our throat, our third eye, or pineal, and then our crown. But we have chakras all within our physical body and also within our energetic body as well. So the root chakra is located at the root, which is our tailbone. So it's the very, very end of our spine, right? The root chakra's main function is embodiment and grounding. So to fully enter into your physical vehicle, to fully enter into this body, into this flesh, and experience life through it is the true embodiment of the root chakra. As we get older, we more easily become out of tune with our body's natural rhythms. And I found for a lot of us as kids, it was a lot easier for us to be like, oh, ow, this hurts, or oh, this doesn't feel good, or we're not necessarily, or we're moving our bodies a lot more and able to utilize our bodies in ways that feel good. And as we become older, because of profession, because of lack of movement, because of injury, we're more easily out of tune with our body's natural rhythms, right? And the thing about it is there are a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of reasons like trauma specifically to the body that can bring us out of tune with our natural rhythms. There are a lot of reasons for us being stuck in our heads and not necessarily wanting to experience the feelings or the things within our bodies. And we become detached and we have an experience which can feel like we only exist here in our mental space, but not necessarily inhabiting in our physical space. And our root chakra invites us to be able to come back into our bodies and feel at home in the bodies that we have, even when it may not feel the most comfortable, familiar, or good. Any questions or comments about that before we keep going? Okay. So what comes to mind when you hear the word trauma? I feel like trauma is one of those really big buzzwords that's being thrown around a lot lately. So what comes to mind when you hear the word trauma? And you can again drop this in the chat or take yourself off of mute. Mm. Someone said pain. Mhm. Harm, injury. Mhm. When we have the conversations around trauma, oftentimes people think of traumatic accidents or traumatic events, assaults, breaking a bone, right? So let's go through what the different types of trauma are. I find that it's really important to break down all the ways in which trauma can show up. So that way we all have an understanding of the different ways that it may present for us and in our bodies. So, trauma is the body's protective response to a situation that is overwhelming, right? And I feel like that may be a new or a different or a much expanded definition of what trauma is. So, trauma inherently is the body's protective response, right? It's the body's way of trying to bring us back into a space of safety when something is overwhelming. And I define overwhelming as anything that happens too much at once, too fast, or too soon, right? And the amount of stress that happens as a part of that situation exceeds one's ability to cope with it in that moment, right? And that in and of itself can explain why two people can go through the same or very similar incidents and have very different responses to the experience. Because one person's ability to cope with that stress, they may have a higher ability or capacity to do that than another person. Mhm. So it exceeds one's ability to cope or to be able to integrate the emotions involved in that experience, right? So this is our definition of trauma. And before we get into the specific types of trauma, anything stick out to you about this definition? Or is it the same? Is it different than any definitions that you've heard beforehand? I know for myself, the first time I saw this definition of trauma, it changed very much so how I thought and perceived my experiences, right? So it may give a new lens as we begin to go on and continue talking about the specific categories or types of events that trauma can fall into. Sorry, I'm super thirsty today, y'all. All right. So, the first, when it comes to talking about trauma and traumatic situations or categories, there are three main categories, right? So, we have acute trauma, chronic trauma, and complex trauma. Acute trauma doesn't mean like, oh, it's cute. No, it's not. That's not what it means. I actually had someone ask me that once, and I was like, "No, that's not it." But I get where you're going. I also love a good pun. But acute trauma is when we have a traumatic event that happens in one singular event. So, for example, acute trauma could be getting into a car accident and and breaking, your arm or your leg. It's a singular traumatic moment that happened, and in that moment you experience the injury, right? Acute trauma, and something that's important to note about acute trauma is that it's a singular event. It's a singular thing that happens, right? Chronic trauma is the accumulation of acute traumatic events, right? So, an example of chronic trauma could be someone who may be in a domestic violence situation and constantly getting into physical assaults with their partner. Each of those moments in which a person experiences that physical assault, in that moment, it is acute trauma. But seeing as it happens consistently over a period of time, that's what makes it chronic trauma. The one thing that I think is really, really interesting is there is no shared time frame or definition for what makes something chronic. And I think that's an important thing to think about, specifically when we have conversations around our own trauma and validating the experiences that we've had. Sometimes, oftentimes for Black women, we find ourselves in this comparison and saying, like, oh, well, I don't have it as bad as so and so, or I'm doing pretty okay. And we can discredit or invalidate our own experiences. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't really matter what other folks are going through. If you are being challenged and you have a negative impact on yourself, it's more than enough to validate your experience. Someone put in the chat, racism is chronic trauma that we all deal with. Absolutely. Absolutely. The impact of racism and the ways in which that it infiltrates our day-to-day interactions is chronic trauma. And I would even take it a step further to say that dealing with the institution of racism is and could be considered complex trauma as well, right? So here's the difference between chronic trauma, which is the same traumatic event happening multiple times, versus complex trauma. And that is when you have multiple traumatic types of events happening over a prolonged period of time. So where chronic trauma, it's the same trauma happening over and over. Complex trauma means that there can be different traumatic events happening over a period of time. And again, I just want to emphasize that there isn't necessarily a distinct time frame in saying, okay, you need to experience this for at least a year in order for it to be a valid experience. Okay. Any questions about the differences between between acute trauma, chronic, and complex trauma, or the definition of trauma and seeing it presented in this way? All right, let's leave that off. So now that we understand what trauma is, let's talk about how trauma interacts with our bodies and our brains, and then what we can do about it. Okay. So we're first going to talk about trauma in the body. So when a traumatic event happens, we have a response built into our bodies that helps us protect ourselves, right? So going back to the previous definition, trauma is the body's protective response, right? So these four ways are how the body protects itself or tries to protect itself from any further harm being done, right? So this may be really familiar if a lot of people have heard of this before, but it's the flight, fight, freeze, and comply method, right? Typically, the way that this framework has evolved is it started with fight or flight, right? Our body had this fight reaction or this flight reaction. And then as the research continued to develop, they realized that we also have these freeze and comply reactions as well. So I'm going to give an overview of each of these and then talk about specifically for us as Black women, how they may show up for us in our community. So with the fight response, our response to a situation that's overwhelming or that we feel like we are being overpowered, sometimes our initial response is to fight. And what that can look like is that you feel that you're in danger, but you believe that you can overpower the threat, right? So for some of us, this can look like arguing. This can look like, oh, well, if you're going to shout at me, then we're going to get into a shouting match. This can look like physical fighting. It can look like actually throwing hands. This can look like maybe property damage or like throwing things or becoming physically aggressive or kind of like posturing or, things of that nature. So that's what fight can look like as a response in the body. It can look like sending a really snippy email. It can look like maybe confronting someone who you feel like has done you wrong, right? So these are all different ways that the fight response can show up. Flight is when you believe that you can overcome the danger by running away, right? This is one that I think we use a lot more than we are conscious and aware of. So, flight for Black women in our response can look like ignoring calls, ignoring texts, isolating, leaving situations, um, maybe going and staying at so and so's house or getting away from so and so for a period of time. For some folks, this could look like completely picking up and moving their lives and going somewhere else. Um, a lot of this can look like avoidance at work. This can look like, you know, kind of just getting up and walking out of the meeting. This can look like avoiding certain people, anytime that they're around you or that they're saying things, kind of just avoiding anything. So flight can look like a lot of avoidance. Typically, it looks like just trying to not deal with it in any sort of way. Someone said, I'm good for a snippy email. Yeah, man. I'm also good for a snippy email. I almost lost my job in college because I sent a message in the group chat. It was bad. It was bad. It's really bad. But it is what it is. You live and you learn. But yeah, so then after the flight response, you have the freeze response. So this is instead of the fight and the flight, when you feel like you can get out of the danger or overcome or overpower the danger through action. Freeze is when you feel like you are overpowered because of the danger, and you can either consciously choose or just become stuck or frozen, right? For a lot of people, this, particularly in Black women, looks like shutting down. Freeze also can look a lot like the symptoms of depression. It can look a lot like what some people may feel like, I just feel like I'm giving up. It can look like a really good case of the F is like, I don't care, whatever. It can look like apathy. It can look like just like whatever, kind of giving up in that regard. And one of the things that I like to remind folks is typically you move through trying to enact an action before you freeze, unless you feel completely overpowered in that regard. But typically, most folks will usually try to either fight or flight before they go into freeze mode. So that's just something to keep in mind as you think about how your body responds to trauma and thinking about your own personal trauma responses. Think about the ways in which your body responds. And do you feel like you fight first, you flight first, or do you feel like you kind of just things happen and you shut down? Right. And that's just good information for each of us to know about ourselves and really thinking about, okay, now that I know this about myself, how can I plan to help keep myself safe? Right. So lastly, there's comply. So this is also in tandem with the freeze response. It's when you feel overpowered by a threat and you give in to the request or prompt of the aggressor, right? Where freeze is kind of just like this, I don't care, whatever, I'm not doing it kind of attitude. Comply is like, yeah, like, okay, what can I do to fix this? What can I do to make this right? Whatever you need, I don't care. Which a lot of people also, when they feel very powerless or when they feel very hopeless, that's their response. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that these are all natural responses and that there is none, these aren't on a hierarchy. None of these are better or worse than others. They're all just ways in which we respond, right? So reminding ourselves, wherever you feel like you fall along the spectrum, that there should be no shame, right? In how you move through this experience, because this is just how your body processes the trauma. This is just how your body responds in an effort to try and keep you safe. Any questions or comments on our connections to trauma in the body? All right. So we're going to get into trauma in our lizard brain. So I did want to shout out Resma Menakem in his book, My Grandmother's Hands, where some of this information, if you see any specific quotation marks, it came from this amazing, 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 amazing book. It's just so impactful and powerful. And if you want more information on trauma, on how trauma impacts the body, on the historical impact of generational trauma and cultural trauma, and what it has to do with our bodies and how we are impacted by that, with some really good physical tools on how to help continue to discharge that information from your body. Highly, 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 highly recommend this book. It's not a book that's super duper technical, so it's definitely accessible for folks, regardless of education or technical skills within the field. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure. I had some notes that I want to pull up because it was too good to not have for tonight. So trauma in our lizard brain. So our reptilian brain is the oldest part of our brain, and this includes our amygdala, which is it's literally like a little nut. This is what they taught us in grad school. It's like a little nut. It's at the base of your brain stem, and the amygdala is responsible for all of our sensory input. It's responsible for all of our automatic processing, so things that you don't have to think about. Your breathing, your heartbeat, your temperature regulation. These are all things that are controlled by this amygdala. The amygdala is also responsible for passing all of the information through and going through this process of, is it safe or is it not safe? So the first part about this is to thank our ancestors, because this amygdala and the information and the ways in which our amygdala is programmed really has a strong connection to our ancestors and our ancestral connection. So this part of our lizard brain literally developed when we, in theory, we're amphibians, and it's the oldest part of the human brain that we are aware of. The thing that's really interesting is this part of our brain cannot actually think. When we have conversations about what we feel like thinking is, logic, reasoning, creativity, things of that nature, that all exists in our prefrontal cortex. That's where we do all of the operations that we typically categorize as thinking. Our lizard brain really is just responsible for keeping us alive. That's its only job, is like, how do I keep you alive? Every day in and day out, let's keep you alive. It's reflexively protective, and it is strong. It is very, very, very strong, right? So if you have ever been in a car and, somebody cut you off and you thought that you were about to get into a car accident, what are some of the first things that change within your body? Your heart rate speeds up, maybe your visions get, really, really narrowed. You kind of get this rush of adrenaline, which is actually cortisol, within your body. And that is your body's response to trying to keep you safe. And whether you can recognize in that split second if it's not going to happen, it still sends that response, right? This part of our brain loves safety and predictability. It understands predictability as safety. It understands things that are familiar as being equated to being safe, even if we know that they are not. And the reason behind that is because it understands that anything that it cannot predict, anything that it cannot understand, anything that it cannot control, leaves a lot of space for potential hurt and harm. And if there's anything that that part of our brain does not like, is anything that can bring it harm, again, because its only job is to try and keep us alive. Right? Give me 1 second. Let me just close this door real quick. Okay. So this part of our brain is the first line of defense. All of our sensory input passes through our lizard brain before it reaches our prefrontal cortex or our thinking, reasoning brain. So any of the information that we get through our five senses, which is sight, sound, touch, taste, or smell, all passes through the sensory input before it gets to our logical thinking brain. All of this processing happens in a fraction of a second. And our bodies are taking in so much information from our senses all of the time. If you take a minute to just be still where you are and think about the things that you see, the things that you hear, the things that you can touch or that are touching your body. Just in this moment. As we get quiet and just take a moment of stillness, we can recognize and pull in consciously more of this information. So for example, I heard the cars driving by on the street. I heard somebody shooting off what I hope is fireworks around the corner. I heard the birds chirping. I saw a gnat or something in my office, which is gonna irritate me, but it's fine. And I felt my earrings kind of dangling and dusting up against my neck and my shoulders. And when we slow down, we can start to categorize all of these different things that we're getting within our sensory input. But whether we're conscious of it and we're aware of it or not, our body is taking this in all the time, all the time. And all of this processing happens so quickly, like literally, it's like this speed checks and balances system. Like, is it safe? 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 And if it is safe, then it kind of it goes through and it's fine. It's like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, yeah, that's a car. I recognize the sound of a car. That's a car. We're fine. But if it doesn't know what happens, what our amygdala does is it sounds the alarm. So what it does is it sets off this chain reaction of responses within our brain and within our body, again, in an effort to try and protect us and keep us safe. A part of sounding that alarm can look like, again, our increased heart rate, our increased or shallow breathing. It can look like tunneled vision. It can look like blurred vision. It can kind of look like this activation of our large muscle groups. It can shut down digestion. It can shut down sexual reproductive functions. It can dry up saliva in our mouths. It can make our sense of hearing more keen and more astute. And again, all of these things developed evolutionarily to try and keep us safe, right? And the thing that's important is that the lizard brain can override the thinking brain whenever it senses real or imagined danger. So going back to all this time when we were cave women, hanging out in our caves, eating our buffalo or whatever, being women of the land. We needed that response to understand like, oh shit, is that a tiger? Is that tiger gonna come and attack me and like try and kill me and eat me? Our bodies responded in this way to give us energy to try and overcome the threats. The challenge is, as we've continued to evolve and live in this modern world, our brains are kind of slow and they did not necessarily continue to evolve. Or what I'll say is we as human beings within the knowledge and the understanding of our species at this point in time have not unlocked other alternative ways of existing outside of this limitation or expansion, depending on how you look at it. But the challenge is oftentimes our brains, because they're so reflexively strong, they don't know the difference between real danger or imagined danger, right? And this really comes into play with folks who have anxiety, who may have even maybe chronic issues with their GI, IBS. This can also come into play when folks have even like panic disorders as well. Anytime that their body senses danger, they go into this overreactive response constantly over and over and over and over. And their lizard brain essentially is kind of hijacking their ability to reason and think through what's going on. And the challenge with that is once that alarm is sounded, no, it's very, very hard for any other information to get through, because at that point in time, all of our energy, focus, and attention is drawn back to that lizard brain. And our goal is to stay alive. That is all that the brain and body is thinking is, how do we stay alive? How do we protect ourselves? How do we keep ourselves safe? And this can go for perceived threats, real threats. If we feel embarrassed, if we feel like someone's disrespecting us, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be physical hurt or harm in our prospect. Any questions about this before we move on? Y'all still with me? Okay. All right. Excuse me. All right. So this is a quote from my grandmother's hands. I like to say it's not our fault. So this is a direct quote from the book. Many of us are thinking of our brain as a tiny CEO in our head who makes important executive decisions, but this metaphor is misguided. Our cortex, our prefrontal cortex, our thinking part of our brain, doesn't get the opportunity to have a thought about any piece of sensory input unless our lizard brain lets it through. In making its decision, our reptilian brain always asks the same question: is this dangerous or safe? Right? And I think that when it comes to these responses for folks that may have challenges with anxiety, or with being able to just regulate their bodies on a regular basis, I like to remind folks that it's sometimes folks can really personalize it and be like, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I get it together? Like, I know that this doesn't make sense. I know that this is illogical, but I can't help this feeling. And I like to remind folks it's because your body is driving the reaction, right? Your brain, your reptilian brain isn't letting the information through to be able to have a different response. But we're going to talk about some strategies on what we can do so that way we can unlock that a little bit more. Okay. So remember that dangerous can mean a threat to more than the well-being of our body. This is what I was alluding to on the last slide as well. It can mean a threat to anything that we do, say, think, care about, believe in, or yearn for. And I think that that's something that's really important distinction, because oftentimes, again, as Black women, we can have our emotions and our feelings and our experiences invalidated. And people can very easily dismiss us and by saying, oh, you're being emotional, or it's not that big of a deal, or it's not that deep, or I went through that and it wasn't that bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important for us to remember that the responses that we have and the things that we feel like are a threat, whether that if we can logically reason if they are a threat or not, is because it feels like a threat to anything that we do, say, think, care about, believe in, or yearn for, which is why it makes sense when somebody tries to attack or downplay the dreams that you have or the things that are important to you, why you may feel like this very visceral response, right? When somebody tries to get you to change your beliefs or tries to get you to believe in something that you just don't believe in, why that can feel like such a visceral response, right? It doesn't necessarily just mean it has to be a threat to our physical being. It does definitely include that, and I don't want to discount that, but I think it's also important that we include others as well. So when it comes to safety, our thinking brain is third in line. First, we respond through our body, then we respond through our lizard brain, and then we get to logic and reasoning, which is why I like to remind folks that when we're having these responses, it's important to take a beat, to take some time to kind of unlock our reptilian brain so we can get to our prefrontal cortex and our thinking brain. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those strategies in our following slides. Any questions about trauma in the brain, now that we've talked about trauma in the body or trauma in the brain? Questions, comments, concerns? It's really good. Have a good seltzer water, y'all. Okay. So this is my reminder for all survivors of trauma. I am going to read this. Feel free to repeat this to yourself. Feel free to just listen along. But this is a reminder for all folks who have survived trauma. What happened was real. No one can invalidate my truth. What happened was not okay. What happened was unfair. It is not my fault. There was nothing I did to deserve this. Trauma is not a flaw or a weakness. My body did what it needed to do to keep me safe in the moment. Thank you, body, for keeping me alive in a situation that tried to break me. What feels safe is completely up to me. I can take as much time as I need to heal. Healing my trauma is not attention seeking. My feelings are valid. I'm having a normal response to a truly messed up situation. I am not alone. I get to choose how I integrate this experience into my story, as does the motorcycle brigade, I suppose. What?
This slide is so very touching. Is it okay that I screenshotted it?
Yeah,
Yep.
this is beautiful. These are really, really good affirmations. I love it.
Now that the mile-long motorcycle brigade has gone on. Yes, absolutely. I guess I thought they were gone. Um, I think these are all things that all trauma survivors need to hear. Um, we all go through versions of these, or thoughts of the opposite of these. And I think it's really, really important that anybody that's experienced trauma understands each of these postulates, if for another word, or affirmations, because the world will try and tell us differently, and we'll believe it. We'll believe it. But what's important is, I think, that we remind ourselves that there are other things, there are other alternatives, right? So I think that's why this is very important. All right. So now we're going to talk about your soul nerve. So we talked about trauma in the body. We talked about trauma in the brain. So now let's talk about the thing that ties the two of them together. Resma names this the soul nerve, but it's called your vagus nerve. It is a part of your autonomic nervous system, and it flows from your brain stem through your spinal column and across your organ system. There are ones that are in your face. There are bundles that are close to your heart, in your heart space. There are bundles under your diaphragm. They go down into your legs and your arms. They're all over your body. The unifying organ of the nervous system is the vagus nerve, a complex nerve communication system within our own body, and it also helps us respond and communicate between bodies, between people, right? And when we talk about the concept of co-regulation, or being able to help our bodies regulate with another person, this is when we have two vagus nerves or two soul nerves talking to each other, helping each other come into, essentially come back to the same level, right? And whichever one is the more dominant one in that moment is where we're going to attune to. Okay. So the cool part about the vagus nerve is that it operates outside of the thinking brain. So for a lot of folks that try to rely on logic to help them move through traumatic experiences, the vagus nerve is something that operates outside of that. So when you don't have access to your thinking brain, when you're kind of locked out and you're in that trauma response and you're feeling activated, you can utilize the nervous system and utilize your vagus nerve to help unlock what's going on there and move from being in a locked position to being able to think and reason. The goal of the vagus nerve is to create a safe enough, still enough space so that your body can come back to a space of getting closer to what your baseline is. And I think this is a very radically different way about thinking of healing trauma and thinking about our responses and healing from trauma. Oftentimes people, when they have conversation around healing trauma, they're like, I just want to be over it. I just want it to be gone. I don't want it to impact me ever again or at all. And for a lot of folks, that's just not possible. It's something that happened that dramatically impacted us, that changed our way of thinking, perceiving, and existing within this world. And for some folks, it takes years to be able to maneuver and navigate that. But the goal is, how can we create space that is safe enough and still enough so that way we can come back home to ourselves and feel at home and feel calm and feel good, even if it's just a little bit more than we did yesterday. right? That's what they call the 1% theory. 1% more. That's it. You just want to be just a little bit more safe, a little bit more still. Right? Nope. This is where we're gonna get to share, to try and like alleviate the heat that was going on there. But drop in to the chat down below. What is in your toolkit? What is in your coping skills toolkit? What do you use to cope? Positive, neutral, or negative? What are the things that are in your toolbox that you use? You can put that in the chat. You can take yourself off of mute and share that way.
I like a lot of things, but I like a warm bath. I like using incense. I like gentle rocking or like self-soothing through hugs, a weighted blanket. I like grounding outside in the grass with bare feet. Dancing, meditating, all of the things. Sometimes just humming is really nice too, just kind of like zoning out, tapping. Yeah, I feel like I use a lot of different techniques. I have a lot in my toolbox.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
All right. Leslie, was there anything that you wanted to share? Okay. Ooh, we already talked that. Duplicate side. So when we talk about our having a well-balanced toolkit, when we talk about healing from trauma, I like to remind folks when we have all of these different tools to think about all of our tools in 4 specific categories, right? You have advanced preparation strategies, in the moment strategies, recovery strategies, and ongoing maintenance type strategies. So to have a balanced toolkit is to have tools in each of these categories. It is possible, and I remind people all the time, you can have the same tool in multiple or all of the categories, but it's really up to you and what feels best. Advanced preparation strategies, these are the tools that you use when you're anticipating entering a known stressful situation. For me, there was a point in time where, an ex and I had to go to court with like a previous landlord. Every time that we would have court, every time that we would have to go into court, I would just become completely overwhelmed all over again. So some of my advanced preparation strategies were that morning, I would take like a super duper 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 long shower. I would do my full body care routine, my full face care routine, a full lathering on all the lotions and the perfumes and making sure that I felt good, because that helped me prepare for a situation that I knew was going to be stressful. Then we have our in the moment strategies. These are useful for moment to moment management of intense arousal, affect, which are our emotions, or unexpected distress. So these are things that you can use in the moment. When that coworker is pissing you off and you have to sit in this meeting and they just blah, 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 blabbering on, what are the things that you can do to help yourself in that moment? For me, some of my favorite in the moment strategies are using like mantras and saying like, this too shall pass. I don't have to take on the emotions of others. I'm okay. That's my big one. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm good. But these are the things that I use for moment to moment. And the cool part about moment to moment is that you can use them if you're anticipating things or if you're not, right? Regardless of if you anticipated it or not, you always want to have a recovery strategy. So after a challenging situation, for stress relief, recovery strategies support moving through your emotions and allowing the body to disperse the energy, right? So some of my favorite recovery strategies, I'm a nap girly. Like my body, I feel a lot in my body. So having space to just rest, whether that's, restorative yoga, putting my feet up the wall, taking a bath, just things to help my body kind of calm back down. Those are things that are really helpful and supportive to me after stressful situations. And then we have ongoing support. So these are used to support a comfortable level of arousal or feelings, to increase general well-being and decrease stress. So these are the things that you're doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, annual basis to just offer yourself general support. Some of those things look like, for me, again, because I feel a lot of things in my body, getting body work done. Sharing with community is something that's an ongoing support strategy for me. Another thing of ongoing strategy for me that I like to do is exercise. That's what I was going to say. Movement, like really just being able to move and use my body in ways that feel good. So that is how you create a balanced toolkit, and you can have tools for essentially any moment and every moment that kind of comes up. Any questions about this framework for categorizing your tools?
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment. I really liked how you broke this down because it just kind of made me think a little bit more specifically as to what tools I'm using and when, and also maybe where I could perhaps have more, or like if maybe like the ongoing or the recovery is a little heavy. It kind of made me think like, okay, what am I actually doing in the moment? I know there's like a couple that I really have go-tos, but yeah, I really liked, like, that was very thought-provoking for me to kind of dive in a little bit deeper and break that up a little bit instead of just like a blanket like statement of like, these are all my tools. But yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. And that's
Mhm.
something that I found for a lot of Black women. It's just like, okay, you know, um, what happens is, you go on Google and you say, all right, give me a coping skills list. And they're like, bet 100 coping skills. And then you're sitting here and using them and you're like, okay, well, like this isn't working, or I don't think this really is for me. But it's not necessarily that the coping skill may not work for you, but are you using it at the right time?
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, it's also it's just really good language. Like I can share with my community and my clients this in a way too, where I think they can, if we can't hit all the different situations where they might need this, then they can kind of like think of them, on their own. Um, if I could share a favorite for in the moment, for some reason that one's like jumping out at me because at first I'm like, what do I really do? And like you can breathe and stuff, and I don't know, there's certain ones, but in the moment, I have like this, I guess like it's just like a grounding technique, but I think of like my feet on the floor and I just connect with my body and the touch sense. And I just start at my feet up and I just kind of like, instead of overthinking and when you're in the moment and you want to be reactive, whatever, I just kind of like get back into my body that way and think of, my 10 toes on the floor and that touch sensation and kind of like move up my body from there. That really helps me. And that was something that had been taught to me and I really like that one. So I wanted to share that. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And that kind of goes in tandem with our meditation that we're going to be doing a little bit later, our tree retreat
Yes.
meditation and grounding through our feet. So thank you very much for sharing.
Dope. Thank you.
Mhm. And since we're sharing tools, here's some of my favorite tools from my personal toolkit. So how this you will work out most times is the way that I use this for folks. And in my coping skills workshop that we did last year, which that's available on YouTube to watch as well, is we kind of created a grid. So you had your 4 different categories on one side. So advanced prep, in the moment, recovery, and ongoing. And then at the top of the grid, you had mind, body, spirit. So that way you're able to categorize and put tools. Again, multiple tools can exist in multiple different domains or facets of that. But you can think about, okay, I'm really feeling anxious or my mind is really racing. So what's an advanced preparation strategy for my mind? Okay, I can scroll on social media, I can do a puzzle, or I can, play chess or whatever have you. And that's a way that you can start to utilize it and actually have an actionable plan. So some of my favorite tools from my personal toolkit, for my mind, I'm a distraction girly. I don't even try and front and play like I'm a distraction girly. I am a TV girly. Give me a good Netflix series. Give me a good haha, laughy laughy. Give me a good action movie, a rom-com, comedic romance. Love it. Love it. That's my jam. I'm also love visualization and meditation. Those are two really big tools for me and being able to like calm my mind. I like puzzles. I like doing word searches. I don't like crosswords because I'm dyslexic and it's stupid. I'm sorry. But I really like word searches. I don't know, it's weird. Um, so there's that. And then I love to read, as evidenced by all the books on our shelves. We love reading in this house. For my body, I am trying to get more into stretching, but I've been doing a lot of walking lately. I really love to dance. I just do. It's just my jam. I'm also a rocker. I have a rocking chair in our living room that I love to just kind of like sit in, and then humming and singing as well. And then for my spirit, gardening. I don't have a garden right now, like a real garden, but I have stuff that I am planting and growing. Prayer is something that really connects me to spirit, creating art, and then being in community with other people. So those are some of my favorite tools. All right, let me just take a sip here. And we're going to come into our second to last part of our workshop. We're going to talk about building capacity, right? So when we have these moments where we feel like our brain is locked up, when we're in our fight, flight, freeze, comply response, what can we do? What is a process that we can move through to help ourselves get out of that state and get closer to our baseline? And I wanted to be very specific with my language here, excuse me, and saying, how do we get closer to our baseline versus saying getting back to our baseline? Because it may take ourselves going through this process or going through the steps of this process multiple times in order for us to get back to our baseline, right? Versus, oh, we're going to do it once, then we're going to be perfectly fine. And I think that's also a really big misconception, again, for folks when it comes to using coping tools, is like, I had to remember this for myself recently. It's like, just because you use the coping tool doesn't mean that you're going to go back to feeling 100% better right now. And that's okay, right? I think it's important to remember, like, that's okay if that's the truth of where we are right now. The goal isn't necessarily to do it once and feel perfectly fine, but can we create more space and can we get closer to what feels good for us, right? So the first anchor is soothing yourself, so self-soothing. Then we're going to notice sensations and ground our body. We're going to learn through moving, how to move through accepting the discomfort and feeling through the discomfort and staying present within that so that the energy can move and then we can discharge it. Okay. So anchor one, we want to soothe ourselves. So once we have these responses, it's really important that we come back to ourselves. Sometimes instead of responding immediately in that moment, if it doesn't require a response of you immediately in that moment, say nothing. Just breathe. Feel your breath moving through your chest and your belly. When you start to feel yourself getting activated, This is the first step to kind of bringing yourself back, right? One of the things that you can do is start to think back to an experience in your body that felt safe, soothing, or pleasurable. You can think about being with a loved one or a friend that it feels very safe and comforting to be with. And then lastly, if possible, step back and slow down. If you can take physical space to calm and then return, do it. Or do something to slow things down without dismissing or running away if that's not an option. One of my favorite ways of doing that is taking a sip of water. Or another good one is, can you hold that thought? I gotta use the bathroom. Go into the bathroom, splashing some water on our face, taking a couple of deep breaths, calming ourselves, and then returning when we feel like we are at a place where we're a little bit more soothed. Okay. After we're soothing, we're going to work to notice whatever sensations come up in our bodies, right? So, to the best of your ability, be in your body. Pay attention to your body's experience of being in your clothes, maybe having your feet in your shoes. If you have any jewelry on, if you feel that on your body, if you're wearing a mask, feeling the mask on your face, but notice the sensations of all the things on your body. If your wrist or your watch is buzzing at you, pay attention to what's happening on in your body. And a part of paying attention, you can experience and name anything, either to yourself or aloud, of each sensation by doing a quick body scan. And you can say, I feel tightness in my shoulders. My chest feels open. My legs feel jittery. My head feels heavy, right? So from head to toe, just see what's going on, checking in with each part of your body. And the hard part about noticing sensations is your brain will start to want to make up stories, or it'll try to pull you out of that. Because again, the brain's thought is that I'm trying to keep you safe, so we need to focus on these other things, right? But the goal is to continue to bring yourself back to your body, right? And back to your sensations. So instead of getting frustrated with yourself about when thoughts, emotions, or reactions arise, know that it's going to happen and just bring yourself back. All right. Next, accepting the discomfort. Throughout this whole entire process, this is probably the hardest. And I'm not even going to pretend like it's not. It definitely is. Hang in there. Hang in there, friend. Okay. When you feel the urge to reject the discomfort, try and keep your attention focused in on it, with the caveat of unless it feels unsafe to do so, right? If you really feel like it does not feel safe to focus on that, then don't. It's okay to trust yourself to know what you need in any given moment. And you don't have to push yourself to a space of not feeling safe, even though you're uncomfortable. Right? And understand the difference between discomfort and unsafety, or unfamiliarity and safety and unsafety. So just be here. Again, you might get the urge to analyze or try and get solutions, or other memories might pop up, or thoughts about the future might come up. And to the best of your ability, come back to the sensations within your body. And know and remember that any and all discomfort that you're feeling in this moment is to not judge it, right? The important part is that this is your body's way of trying to protect you. And sometimes it might not feel like that, but the goal again is here to accept, okay, body, this is how you're trying to keep me safe. I just need to be with you in this moment so we can feel this. And once they're able to accept and experience, then we get to move, right? So we're staying present here. I know it may seem like 2, 3, and 4 are like the same. I'm saying the same thing, but it's really important, right? So we're going to stay present. We're not going to try and know what happens next. We're not going to try and get a specific response or get to elicit specific responses from others. We're going to do our best to try and act from our best parts of ourselves and personal integrity, right? This is why we slow down instead of having these knee-jerk reactions or responses. It gives us the opportunity to really be like, okay, where am I? What's the goal? What do I need? How can I move forward? And I think it's important to remember that like it takes practice, right? So you might fall off or somebody might interrupt you and you might feel like, "Oh, now I'm activated all over again." And that's okay. You can always start again. You can always start again. Okay. And then lastly, this is my favorite part, you get to discharge the energy. So once you've named it, once you've experienced it, and once you've accepted it, now it's time to be like, okay, now we can move this energy in throughout our body. So the energy of the situation will remain in the body or in your field, your energetic aura field, until it's released. The goal is to release this energy as soon as it's been experienced, right? There are lots of different ways to release the energy. Some of my favorite ways are through full body movement. So exercise, full body active sports, physical labor, cleaning, dancing, moving, walking, jogging, playing with the kids. Any of those things can help really move and release energy from your body. Maybe there are other energetic practices that you need to do for releasing. Maybe you need to have a good cry. Maybe you might need to sit at your altar or sit in prayer or sit in meditation. Maybe there's some energetic work like Reiki or cord cutting that needs to happen. Maybe there needs to be, a letter that's written and burned. There's a whole lot of different ways to release that energy, and you can trust that your spirit will know what to do once it's experienced it to help it move through your energetic fields. So follow your body, follow your body's moment to moment guidance. Let your body do what it wants, unless it causes harm to others. And again, what you need will come to you in that moment. And I like to remind folks, you already have everything inside you to heal. You already have everything inside you to heal. You already had everything inside you to heal. It's important to remember this and to say this over and over and over, because I think oftentimes we continue, especially as Black women, to look outside of ourselves as at others and as experts to try and get us to heal. And the truth of the matter is we already have what we need right here. We may want to get some feedback. We may want to get a mirror in terms of a coach or a therapist, but we have everything that we need. There's nothing else that the world has for us that we don't or can't do for ourselves. All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns about the anchors before we move into our final piece and having our little meditation before we jump out and dip out for the day? No. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. Okay. So, you ready? Okay. We're now going to get started with our meditation. We're going to go ahead and get into a comfortable position. This can be either seated or lying down. Taking a moment to just get comfortable here. I invite you to have your hands palms down today. You can have your palms down on beside you. You can have your palms down on your thighs. You can place one hand or both hands over your belly or your heart. Taking a moment to slow our breathing down. Making our inhales and our exhales just a little bit longer. Taking a moment to feel the support of whatever is beneath you. Noticing the points of connection under your feet, under your butt, under your back. Feeling the support, the holding. Letting our bodies relax into this support. Letting our bodies relax into being held. by whatever is beneath us. Allowing your body to feel heavy. Relax here. Allowing your feet to feel heavy, your legs to feel heavy, your hips to feel heavy, your back to feel heavy, your chest to feel heavy, your arms to feel heavy, your head to feel heavy. Letting the entire body rest in the support given. Bring into your imagination now you approaching a tree. Not overthinking the first tree that comes to mind. Taking a moment to notice the tree. What stands out to you at first? Walking up and approaching the tree. And taking your hands and placing them on the tree's trunk. Feeling the energy exchange between you and this tree, your tree. What messages does this tree have for you? Trusting in the messages that you have received. Take a seat beside the tree, resting your back against its trunk. Feel the tree exchanging energy with you. As you inhale, the tree gifts you groundedness and a connection to her roots. That travel far, far beneath the surface. And as you exhale, the tree exchanges her energy and her rootedness for your pain. Continuing with this cycle of inhaling and deepening, and exhaling and releasing. Continuing to feel into this exchange with your sacred tree. Deepening our breath and giving gratitude to our sacred tree. Thanking it for recycling our energy that we are ready to discard. Taking the things that were painful, composting it, and turning it into fertile soil for which the tree continues to grow on. Standing up and taking one last step back from our tree. Any last messages? Starting to deepen the breath here, increasing the length of our inhales and our exhales, bringing energy and vitality back into the body. Wiggling our fingers and toes, and coming back into the room, slowly blinking our eyes open when you're ready. And as just a quick grounding exercise to come back into our space, taking a moment and noticing 3 things that are blue that you can see where you are right now. Okay. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I forgot what I do to do like the confetti thingy.
Thank you.
There we go. Confetti. Any questions, comments, concerns, queries, qualms, conundrums, or testimonials? Let me know. Thank you all so much for joining us. For the folks who were here live and for the folks who catch the replay, I'm super excited. If you have any feedback, feel free to email me and reach out to me on Instagram. We are also having a sister book club right now and reading through The Sisters Are All Right, Changing the Broken Narrative on Black Women in America, which is amazing. So join us also over there. And thank you all so much for coming. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope to see you again soon.